Hi guys, it's Travis, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different with my channel in this video. I'm starting a course at St. Andrews University in Laurinburg, North Carolina, and the course is entitled Whitman Dickinson. So basically for part of the semester I'll be studying one poet, and for the second part of the semester I'll be studying a second poet. And I proposed this idea to my instructor that for the first part with Whitman, at least, perhaps with Dickinson as well, I would do a video series as I followed a biography, and I also read Whitman's poems, and I would do a video series so I could share some of my findings and information with people on YouTube. And together with that, I'll also be writing some blog posts, or maybe on WordPress, maybe on Blogspot. I haven't decided yet. But those blog posts will take a look at the poems themselves, which may be mentioned in the videos, they may not be. I haven't decided exactly how that's going to work yet. But the blog post will mention, for example, next week I'm going to do my first blog post, and it's going to be about Song of Myself, because that's one of Whitman's one of his most used pieces, one of his most famous poems, sort of introduces Leaves of Grass. And for that blog post, I'll mainly be looking at symbols, I'll be looking at language, I'll be looking at style, I'll be looking at influences, lots of aspects of the poem itself. So you can watch these videos and then follow a link that'll be in the description box below, and it will take you to the blog, specifically the blog post for that week that goes along with the video. So how it'll work will be each Tuesday I'll be posting a new video that will be responding to the biography. And the video will be hopefully 10 to 15 minutes each time. I'm hoping not to get too long, but if there is a section that's much longer with a lot more information, the video will be extended. And in doing this 10 to 15 minute segment, I'll take a look at what David Reynolds, our author, says about Walt Whitman in the section. I'll take a look ahead at the next section and let you know what topics will be coming up in the next video. And I'll also mention during each video what things I'll be writing about in the blog. So for example, next Tuesday there will be a video about chapter 2 of this biography called Walt Whitman Lives and Legacies. And there will also be a blog post about Song of Myself in its entirety. And I'm not going to split Song of Myself up into two blog posts because it's very cohesive, it's very free-flowing, and a lot of the ideas not only follow the preface of Leaves of Grass, but they also connect to one another. So I'll be doing that in one posting. And I would really like for anyone who watches to share this video with your peers, your colleagues, your fellow students, your friends. And I'd love for college students or high school students or adults, whomever, teachers, to respond to these videos in the comment section or on the blog post. I'm sure there'll be a way to comment on those as well and provide your own insights, your own commentary, your own ideas that may be relevant to the material that's being covered. And in doing so, we can start a dialogue, a communication, a conversation about Walt Whitman, and hopefully we can uncover some of the connections and influences and stylistic choices that he makes use of in his work. So here's a picture of the book cover. I'm sorry about that glare, it's awful. It's called Lives and Legacies. It's by David Reynolds. And I'm using an electronic book on my Nook, but you can buy it in print. And if you don't want to buy the book, you don't have to. You can just follow along with the videos, because I'll be making a very brief commentary on each chapter. And sometimes I'll be connecting it to poetry that I'm reading as well. And it might tie some of the ideas in together a little bit better. So for this first video, it's an introduction to what I'm doing. I can't tell you for sure yet how many parts this will be until I finish the section of Whitman, of course, but I'll have to read the book in a way that allows me to finish it by the time I'm supposed to be done with the Whitman part of the course. And then I'll start on Dickinson. And if this does well, if there's interest, if people learn from it and communicate, then maybe I'll do videos for Dickinson as well. So for the first part, I'm just going to talk about a few important facts that I found from chapter 1 of the book, Walt Whitman Lives and Legacies by David Reynolds. The first chapter has a lot of introductory material, it's a lot of background material. The second chapter is called Pop Culture and Politics, so it should focus a little more on Whitman's engagement with the world around him, society, during his time when he's writing. And that'll be a more interactive, engaged video, I'm sure. probably interacting with the poetry at least. So this book, if you're looking for it, if you want to pick it up, it was published in 2005. I think in print it's about 175 pages, correct me if I'm wrong. And the electronic copy is not as long, but that's because it depends on your font, it depends on the size you choose, the margins, everything. But Whitman called himself the bard of American democracy. He wanted his poetry to represent a wide range of experience. He wanted his poetry to touch on every aspect that would be considered American, that would be required to be American. He's really responding to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who in his essay called The Poet asks for a writer to come forth who can represent the American voice, to develop an American voice. And Whitman really takes this role on for himself, and he sees himself as a bit of a sage. He's looking at a fractured society, fractured community, and he's trying to comment on things that he thinks is a hindrance to the community, a hindrance to the country, and hopefully he's successful in some way, but we'll see that further as we look at the poetry. Reynolds says the purpose of the book, his intention for writing this, is transformation of cultural materials into poetry. So he wants to look at facets of the culture, he wants to look at information and connect it to what Whitman's trying to do so he can better understand Whitman and explain some of the choices that he makes as a writer. Whitman was born May 31st, 1819 in West Hills, New York. He has a bit of an interesting bloodline. He is English on his father's side and Dutch on his mother's side. And his parents are very much inspiration for his voice, for his style of writing, for some of the choices he makes. He remembers his father's love for children and cattle and farmlands and the simple life. His father had a free-thinking attitude toward religion. And that's something that sort of follows Whitman as well. As you start to read in Song of Myself and some of the other poems, Whitman's not simply writing from a Christian perspective. He's not simply writing from a Hindu perspective or anything like that. Whitman uses religious language, he uses biblical language, but he connects many of the religions. And it's interesting because religion does have sort of a universal language to it with universal laws. His mother, in fact, is the storyteller, the peacekeeper. She's creative and imaginative, and that's sort of a deadly combination, I guess, when you think about it, having the simplistic, free-thinking farmer type in his father, and then the storyteller in his mother. I find that very interesting, and sort of the combination that comes out of that being Whitman. And I think he embodies both of those very well, at least his narrators and his voice and his poetry does. He's shaped by deism and Quaker attitude. Deism is the idea, obviously, that there is a God, there is this power, there is this higher spiritual energy, and it sort of created the world, created people, and then backed away. Not an engaged God. The Quaker doctrine of inner light, if you're familiar with the Quaker thought, Quaker religion, you know that a lot of their inspiration, their religious thinking comes from themselves. It's not something that comes from a preacher or a church. It's not something that comes from necessarily outside influence. It's sort of a voice that develops on their own, highly individualistic, and the inner light, something that Reynolds talks about in the first chapter of the biography. And you could definitely see that as something that shows up in Whitman's work. He's fascinated by words, but he's also fascinated by structure. So Whitman's very involved. He worked a lot of jobs with newspapers as an editor, as a journalist, and he bounced from place to place doing things like that for a while. And it definitely shows up with Whitman's work. He's always focused on what the words look like on the page, how the poetry fits together. You know, if you're familiar with Leaves of Grass, which is the work that Whitman spent all of his time on throughout the process of his life, you see that he adds poetry, he takes poetry away, he takes the preface out, he changes the way things look, the images. The first edition in 1855 of Leaves of Grass actually features Whitman dressed in this rural country farmer type apparel. He's trying to connect to the common man of the time and of society. it's very fascinating how Whitman is fascinated by his work, the way it looks, the way it feels, the way it flows. He's shaped by New York, obviously, but he's also shaped by travel. He was working for Isaac Van Anden, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, as an editor, and he was fired in 1848 because he had free soil views. He wasn't very much someone that could be coerced into speaking a certain way or writing about certain things. So he was fired, and he took a journey to New Orleans. And in his trip to New Orleans, he became influenced by Southern culture, by slavery, which was a big deal at the time. And you could definitely see his time in New York. He spends a lot of time on ferries. He spends a lot of time roaming the streets and walking around, and this is part of his style. It ends up being this free-flowing stream of consciousness, because as he's writing, he's either on a ferry, or he's on the street, or he's doing some kind of transportation. And as he's writing, this sort of becomes a feature of his writing style, this free-flowing stream of consciousness. And I can kind of relate, I think, whenever I write. Sometimes if I'm outside, or if I come up with an idea on the fly, I have nothing to write it down, and I'm sort of sharing it with someone, it just comes out as this this paragraph that has no kind of organization to it. Or if I need a way to remember an idea, if I think it's a good one and I need a way to remember it, I'll just sort of say it to myself over and over. And I could definitely see how this sort of free-flowing style develops for Whitman. Emerson obviously is a huge influence. And what's funny is Emerson commented on Leaves of Grass in 1855 when he read the first copy, and he sort of welcomes Whitman to the beginning of a great career as a writer. He admires the writing, but it ends up becoming a problem because Whitman takes this commentary and Emerson's comments about his writing, and he prints it in the next copy of Leaves of Grass without permission. And it's this really funny situation where Emerson doesn't intend for his words and his response to Whitman to be shared, but they are shared anyway. And Whitman takes advantage of the fact that Emerson enjoys his writing, enjoys his style, and enjoys the fact that he's responding to Emerson's call for the great American poet. And obviously in March 26, 1892, Whitman dies. I'm not given a certain illness that he dies to. I'm not sure if that's something that is public knowledge. In the book, it talks about him sort of withering away, running out of steam, if you will, and just dying. But definitely Whitman has a controversial life. He spends a lot of time with younger men. In his writing, he doesn't hold back when it comes to the body, or sex, or politics and liberty, and a lot of things he talks about make some people angry. And for this time period, it's definitely progressive. And in some ways he's progressive, and in other ways he's not. But those are things that we'll look at more as we progress through the book. So I'm going to wrap up this video right about here. I gave you some information about Whitman, background info, a few comments about the way he's going to be shaping things in his poetry. If you're going to start following this series, if you're going to start with this one, I'll try to create a playlist and have all of them in one place so you can find them easily. And if you're going to do that, I'll also have the link to the blog in the next video in the description box. And it'll either be on WordPress or Blogspot, I think. And you'll be able to follow my comments on the poetry as well. So if you want to pick up the book, please do. It's really informative. It's a nice edition. It's a nice biography by David Reynolds, 2005. I think it's called Lives and Legacies. I know I said it toward the beginning of the video, so you can find it. But yeah, I will be talking about Chapter 2. And there may be some commentary in the next video about Song of Myself as well. So I appreciate your time if you came to watch, and I will see you next time.